Hello and welcome back to the PH Nutrition podcast. My name's Luke. I'm one of the coaches with PH Nutrition, and today I am joined by the founder and owner of PH Nutrition, Liam, the man himself. Liam, how are we doing?
Liam, the man himself. There's a bit too much pressure on my intro, mate. I'm really good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, man. I'm good. No pressure whatsoever. We're just two guys here chatting about hard gainers. So that's what we're going to talk about today, guys. We're going to chat about hard gainers, about whether or not it's an actual thing, what it means to be a hard gainer, and then we're going to dive into maybe some things that you've been doing wrong, which is what makes you think you're a hard gainer. We're not going to call anyone out, of course, and just talk about how to basically build muscle mass when you want to. So sound good, Liam?
Sounds good, mate. Let's get
cool.
into it.
Let's do it. So first point of order is, what do we mean when we talk about hard gainers, and do they actually exist? Give us your thoughts.
Hard gainer is just basically anyone that struggles to gain weight, and that can be muscle and fat. I think, but obviously we're looking at more performance-based. We're looking at more lean muscle today, and they do exist. People will have certain kind of physiological setup to maybe predispose them to make it a little bit more challenging to gain the right type of weight. You may have heard the term ectomorph, where people are slightly skinnier, slightly smaller bone structure, slightly kind of taller, slimmer. Maybe people have slightly higher metabolisms, smaller stomachs. These types of things can actually, they all exist, which then makes it more challenging to gain weight. I think hard gainer, what I often see, the issue is that people label themselves with it, and then that's it.
Yeah,
I've signed off. I can't gain muscle. I can't gain weight. I'm a hard gainer. Whereas hopefully this podcast is going to dive into that isn't the case. So that's my thoughts on it. Hopefully we can point people in the right direction.
Definitely. Yeah. And I totally agree. I think in terms of people calling themselves hard gainers, people love labels. They love to label themselves and feel like part of something. When in reality, it is possible for everybody to gain muscle mass. We know that's possible because we've seen it happen in millions of people in history, right? So it's possible. Everyone can gain muscle mass. It's just a case of how hard you find it. And like Liam said, there's going to be people that are maybe genetically predisposed to be able to pack on muscle a little bit more easily. We obviously know there's going to be a huge variation in metabolic rates within populations as well. But if you think you're a hard gainer, then you probably are. You probably do find it a little bit harder, but that doesn't mean that you can't. So obviously we want to talk about how to actually pack on that mass. And I think for this, what would be good for us to run through, Liam, is kind of common mistakes of people that, like you've said, have labeled themselves as hard gainers and then have basically just thought, there's no point even trying. What are they doing wrong that they could do better?
I think a good place to start is, one of the most common things that we see that prevents people from gaining weight is the fear of gaining fat. And look, I'm in that camp. I'll put myself in that. I'm not a hard gainer. I just don't commit to the process long enough. And, mentally or whatever it is, I say I prefer being a slightly bit leaner. So going through the process of gaining muscle, I kind of hit a roadblock when I start to kind of put on a little bit of body fat. So that's just me being open and honest, and I commonly see that with people. So you can gain muscle leanly, if that's a word, but it's a longer process, and you have to commit to it for an extended period of time. Whereas, the typical bulking and cutting thing, we don't necessarily want to maybe go down, but okay, the more kind of aggressive you are with your diet, the more kind of body fat that you put on, or the more calories that you give it. And if you're not worried too much, then you are going to put on muscle if some of the things that we talk about are in line as well. So the fear of gaining fat is definitely something that prevents people. But for me, one of the biggest common faults is not training in the correct way. I think, definitely you've written a lot on hypertrophy, which we'll come on to in a minute, but I see people doing way too much cardio, doing way too many metcons, doing way too much training, to allow their body to get the correct stimulus to grow muscle. Expand on that a little bit. And
I think the key thing there is kind of the doing too much, because we kind of know that muscle building is an energetic process, right? We need spare energy essentially to build the muscle that we want to build. It's not going to come from nowhere. And there's in the research, I think there's around kind of like three drivers for muscle growth at the mechanical level. You've got mechanical tension, which is the tension that the muscle is under whenever you do the movement. So, for example, in a bicep curl, the tension that you're applying there, curling your bicep, that's mechanical tension. You've got then stress at the muscle as well. Metabolic stress. That's what we call it. Metabolic stress is what we call it, not just stress at the muscle. You've got metabolic stress there as well. And then the third one, which is kind of less, it's more up for debate as to whether this is actually needed or not. And it's kind of one where you think, maybe it's not needed, is muscle damage. So those kind of three things. Yeah. So the mechanical tension of the muscle, the metabolic stress, and then the muscle damage. There we go. We got there in the end. They're the three that are widely believed to be drivers for muscle growth, for hypertrophy. And obviously when we're training, when we're carrying out resistance training, then if you're training in the right manner, you're always going to have mechanical tension. If your muscles are going to be under that tension, and it's going to be there. It's just kind of a case of the right amount needed. And there's been a lot of research out there in terms of load as well, on how much load do you need to create that stress, to create that tension as well. And the good news is that a lot of the research basically said you can get a similar amount of hypertrophy of just muscle growth from working at 35% of your 1 rep max all the way up to 80% of your 1 rep max. And it's one of those where there's maybe even a little kind of crossover point at the higher end of percentages where strength starts to be impacted as well. And that's why a lot of people will train at those higher rep ranges to elicit both hypertrophy and strength adaptations as well, which is always useful for performance as well, but not necessarily needed. You can still get the response at those lower rep ranges, provided that the right amount of volume is there as well, right? Because we're thinking about these three things. And yes, we need these three things. Two of the three things, definitely. Muscle damage, let's forget about it for a bit. But we need the tension, we need the stress, but there's always the question of how much of this do we need as well. Go on, Liam.
No, that's it. Like, I think you're saying that you can gain muscle with high reps and low reps. Yeah. But the key driver is mechanical tension and volume. Yeah. The volume of it, the amount, it's always a dose thing, right? It's the same with, let's use caffeine as an example, just because it's the first one that popped into my head. We know that caffeine is a central nervous system stimulant. You can feel the benefits with the right amount of dosage. If you take in 2 milligrams of caffeine, you're going to get absolutely no benefit of that. So if you apply some mechanical tension and some stress, some metabolic stress, then unless you apply enough, you're not going to get the stimulus, the response from that. And it's still kind of up for debate as to how much is enough, how much is too much in there. And it's one of those where there are some numbers out there. We're nutritionists, so you're better off going to the trainers to find out the right amount of volume. We'll get someone on to deep dive into
Definitely, that sounds good. But it's one of those where you need the right amount as well. And if you're just going to the gym and doing a couple of resistance training sessions and a load of cardio, then you're probably not necessarily getting enough of that tension, enough of that stress to elicit that response. And then on the flip side, what happens with a load of cardio as well is you end up obviously using a lot more energy there. And that leads to less energy to actually build the muscle as well.
Yeah, it's that balance, isn't it? And I think commonly in a practical setting, people would be like, I'm training quite a lot, but they might be doing 2 or 3 sessions a week and then a run. Yeah. And you're like, well, okay, in those 2 or 3 sessions, you can build muscle, definitely. And it comes down to what that session consists of. And if a lot of people here are doing CrossFit or doing some form of, high intensity or functional fitness, then the mechanical tension, yes, it's concentric when we close the muscle or close the joint, but when the eccentric load in CrossFit can sometimes be missed. So therefore, the mechanical tension isn't high if you're doing, if you're being efficient with your movement and you're using, if you're using technique and you're using, kind of body weight and stuff to move through the movement. If you're using like a dumbbell snatch, you're not strict curling it and pressing it, you're using momentum. So again, that's where we lack mechanical tension in that. And yes, we get metabolic stress, so we're getting one thing, but we're not getting all of them, are we, mate? No. So that's where, again, I think common fault is that. Then you said there, that energy balance equation. Yeah. It's something that definitely occurs, whether that's too much output from too much cardio. Again, maybe because there's a fear of getting fat. So you want to do a little bit to stay lean, or it's a lack of consistent intake. And I think that's definitely a big common fault.
Yeah.
So people might go, oh, well, I'm going to try and get a little bit stronger, and they might do it for 8 days, 9 days. And then they go, oh, I'm feeling a bit full here. Probably, not going to, eat too much on my rest day because I'm, feeling a bit full and I'm maybe getting a little bit soft. So therefore you just get caught in this gray zone where you don't really do anything. You kind of then just drift between. So you don't actually move the needle. And that's definitely something that, we need to be in muscle building, like you said, is an energetic process, but it's also a long-term process.
Yeah, definitely.
It doesn't happen. Fat loss can happen relatively quickly. Probably there's a lot of nuance around this. Like if you're starting out trying to gain muscle, you're probably going to gain muscle much quicker than someone that has a larger training age. But even then, gaining muscle is a long-term process. We're talking months, years, as opposed to weeks and months. And I think the mindset behind that is quite challenging for a lot of people to do, to be like, oh my God, I want to gain 3, 4, 5 kilos. But actually to do that, man, you're looking years of the right type of weight. Yeah. Isn't it? So,
and like you said, though, it is hard to physically eat enough food as well sometimes. And I know that's something that in the past, I wouldn't call myself a hard gainer because anyone can gain weight. But I know from kind of obviously the metabolic testing that I've done before that my metabolism for a man my size is pretty damn fast. So I know that I need to, if let's say, so I've done like resting metabolic rate at about kind of 1800, 1900 calories per day, which is quite large for a small man. And I know that I can maintain my weight comfortably on about 3,000 calories a day with the amount of training that I do, which is,
mad,
in all honesty, it's only 3 resistance training sessions and 2 runs. So maybe I am doing too much cardio, but I'm not looking to gain any mass, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I know that, obviously with nutrition, you can always use numbers to display a point, and obviously the numbers are fluid and we eat food and that kind of thing. But just to display that point, let's say that I wanted to pack on mass and ate, 10% more, and ate about kind of 3,300 calories a day. That is a lot of food, and that is a lot of food to get in consistently, especially kind of day to day when life gets in the way. And I know that there's been times in the past where if I've ever wanted to pack on mass, I might do it for about a week and then think, oh, this is so much food. Those thoughts may start to creep in of, is it really too much food, perhaps? And you do kind of almost stop committing to it because it's hard to be consistent. It's hard to kind of trust that process, for sure. It definitely is. And it's about kind of, believing in it and trusting it. And that's why it can help to obviously have someone by your side guiding you through it, definitely, which is always useful. Because when left to our own devices, we'll fail. We'll fail.
We will. It's also, I'm working with a couple of clients in the moment who are trying to get a little bit stronger, maybe move up weight classes in weightlifting. And what we find useful is putting in markers, putting lines in the sand to be like, look, this is going to be 8 weeks. We're going to follow this. This is going to be 6 weeks. And at those points, 6 and 8 weeks and 12 weeks or whatever it is, you then reassess. It might be that you've actually gained too much body fat in that time. Or it might be that you get halfway through and you're like, oh my God, I'm still hungry. Like, your metabolism is a transient thing. It will adapt. And I think sometimes when we're high gainers, like, metabolism can adapt quicker than other people's. So then, you're following something for 2-3 weeks, but then your metabolism adapts. So then you need to adapt to your nutrition, your training, because you just adapt faster. Just like yours is a little bit higher than a lot of other people's, so you need to be a bit more aware. So it's definitely something that for me, it's, a longer term process, and you need to commit to that. And then when we say not eating enough, I also feel another one is not eating enough carbohydrates. And I know, like, probably people in the CrossFit world of, getting a bit bored of people talking about carbs now. Smash your carbs. Everyone needs to eat carbs. It's glycolytic and all of this. But when we're talking about muscle gain, obviously the first kind of thing people focus on is training and protein. And protein is essential, but I don't think that people that are looking to gain muscle have an issue hitting enough protein. I feel that especially when you start to get up around that 3,000 plus, protein intake can be quite high, and it's actually not beneficial to keep eating more. You probably need to be doing is eating more carbohydrates.
Yeah.
And that's going to help drive muscle growth through insulin related pathways, through having enough energy to bloody train. You know, I think freaking Lipson was like, don't go to the gym hungry. If you're trying to gain weight, don't go to the gym hungry. And like, again, a common fault for us here, not eating enough carbs and, not eating enough overall, but potentially even another one there on a bit of a tripod of this is not eating enough pre-workout. Yeah. Going into the gym when you're trying to gain muscle.
Yeah, definitely.
What do you think on that?
Definitely. And that's one of those things where, like, realistically, if you're not training, you're not going to get the stimulus. And if the training is not good quality, it's going to be a lot harder to gain that mass, like we've said before about the tension, about the stress. And if you go into the gym hungry, even if you don't necessarily notice a huge difference that day, there's probably going to be a slightly lower CNS drive. You're going to perform a little bit less, even if it doesn't feel like you are every day. I mean, don't get me wrong, you'll also have days where you feel like you've performed a lot worse. You're not going to get as much out of those sessions because you're not going to be as switched on. You're not going to be able to create as much tension and create those drivers that really force muscle protein synthesis as well and force that gaining of mass, which is what you want.
Yeah. What would you be eating pre like a hypertrophy strength session?
It depends on the timing, definitely. If it's relatively close to a meal, then I would have more carbs during that meal kind of thing. If there's kind of a big gap between, if there's say more than 3 hours between my last meal and that session, that's when I'd be chucking in some carbs, and I'd have them probably about 60 to 90 minutes before that session, maybe even a little bit before. And you want to have more carbs than you think. I think some people before that kind of a session would maybe, grab like a banana or something, which is 20 grams of carbs or so, which is fine. It's great. But if you're looking to gain mass as well, take advantage of the opportunity to have more food and have, like maybe 50 grams of carbs, 60 grams of carbs or so before that session, something that is just more substantial than the normal kind of pre-workout snack you'd go for. And then especially if you're doing hypertrophy, it's not going to be a huge amount of jostling. There's not going to be a huge amount of issues with that sitting heavy on your gut.
Burpee box jumps.
That's if you're training hypertrophy in the right way, you don't need to worry as much about going into it with it sitting on your stomach, with it sitting heavy, because that jostling's not going to be there. You're not going to need to worry about it. So having more than you
carbs,
think.
What about protein, fats?
So that, again, dependent on the time of day as well. Obviously, with protein, we kind of know that if you're not necessarily having a protein feed before, so if you're, say, getting up in the morning and training, then I definitely say have carbohydrates before that. Can be useful to also have protein, but if you don't, it just makes it more important to have protein after that session as well, much more. And if you're training obviously in the afternoon or the evening, the chances are you've already had kind of some decent hits of protein across the day. And speaking of protein, we know that there's kind of more benefit to spacing that intake out across the day in those kind of medium-sized boluses, as opposed to like 1 or 2 huge feeds or loads of tiny little ones of like 10 grams. It's much more beneficial to have like 3, 4, 5 feeds of like 25 to even 50 if you're a bigger dude, grams per day of protein to get it in across the day. And we know that those space, each time you have a protein feed that big, it does cause a little bit more of a spike in muscle protein synthesis. So that kind of overall balance is always going to be tipped in your favor as well, as opposed to big meal early on with loads of protein, big meal later on with loads of protein. There's a large period of time there where you're not giving your muscles what they need to be built. And that muscle protein breakdown is going to be higher and you're going to suffer because of it. So spacing it out, always useful too.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really, really essential point, and something that, when you're trying to gain muscle, you do have to be a little bit more kind of diligent with planning, I think. I think fat loss and other ones, if you're just kind of looking to maintain, you can be a bit more flexible. Whereas, like you said, these things do matter on a consistent basis, like protein spacing across the day, making sure that you're fueling workouts before and after, because you need to drive growth. You need to drive a stimulus, because if you're not overloading in terms of when we talk about training over a period of weeks, over a period of months, if you're just turning up and doing the same percentages, the same weight, the same reps, then you won't see growth. And again, when we talk about hard gainers, again, that's what I see, you see the lads that come in, and how many times have you seen this? When you see the fellow that's on the bench press and he's still pushing 60 kilos, and like last year, he was still pushing 60 kilos.
You've been benching in the mirror again.
Yeah, I know, mate. 60 kilos is always for me. I always go to that.
Slide 220s on, off you go, nice and easy.
No, exactly. Yeah, it's easy, but that's it, isn't it? That progressive overload is needed. But sorry, nutrition-wise, it's definitely that spacing, and it'll be a little bit more dialed in. So we've got carbs, we've got eating enough, we've got training in the correct way, we've got resting enough. So, or not doing as much output, as much cardio. So making sure that you don't just add extra sessions on, adding junk volume in that you don't necessarily need to be doing. One that I have, which is probably a little bit more outside of the discussion on this podcast, is sleeping enough. You know, you need to be able to allow your body to regenerate, to build, to grow. And sleep is the most essential thing for that. So we need to be sleeping enough, and obviously that's individual, but trying to get at least 6.5 to 7.5, 8 hours, definitely. But the quality of sleep, trying to build in a nice sleep routine and making it a priority. I think that's the key. We always focus on, when we're muscle building or hard gainers, we focus on what we think are priorities, which is like protein, training, and creatine, which is, we'll come on to that. But actually, these types of things of resting enough and eating protein across the day and sleeping enough, carbohydrates, these are the things that I think often people that are hard gainers, or people that are struggling to put on muscle mass, definitely. What about pre-bed feeding? Would you do that?
We haven't talked about that, but I'd do that definitely. Again, when we're talking about gaining mass and we're talking about getting the energy in and tipping the scales in that favor as well, any opportunity to have a little bit more food works. But then with pre-bed feeds, with pre-bed protein feeds in particular, which is a bit of a tongue twister there, you get the benefit, again, like I was saying, where you space out your protein feeds and you get this long period of the day where you're not necessarily forcing any muscle protein synthesis. The longest period that most of us go where there's no stimulus of muscle protein synthesis is when we're asleep, because we're not training and we're not eating. And so what a pre-bed protein feed can do is also shorten that window a little bit, and help with that. And pre-bed protein feeds have been shown to improve recovery from training as well, which is just one of those where, like, hey, if you can do it, happy days. It doesn't have to be a case of let me scoff down my Far-Yay and then hit the hay straight away. But kind of like an hour or so before bed, having a protein feed, again, in the range of like 25 plus kind of grams of protein there, can massively help. And for me, that is Greek yogurt, because it's nice and easy, and I sit and have it with my berries and I watch some trash on TV and look, it's bedtime, off I go.
Love Island, 10 o'clock bedtime.
It's good for a bedtime, Love Island, isn't it? Gets you in a routine.
Mate, I'm in bed before that. In the bed before it
Having a kid is great for a bedtime.
Well, yeah, get into bed. But I think they say Greek yogurt is good. We use cottage cheese. People like cottage cheese as well, so another option. And there's a lot of these. I don't know what your opinion is. Maybe just a real quick one. It's like these protein cereals that are coming out. I don't know what I don't even talk about them that much. Maybe I will do now. But my phone seems to get spammed with bloody with Instagram ads on the protein cereals. I think I've only ever tried one of them. It was all right, but I was like, it's £24 for 4 boxes.
Isn't it?
I'm like, I'll just make up a shake and have some Weetabix.
Yeah.
Like,
and that would be my view on it as well, is why would you pay so much more for that when you can get a decent, tasty meal, cheaper, easier?
£6 a box.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. There's always a little bit of kind of a debate as well about the type of protein.
It's soy protein isolate.
Yeah, I think some people can get maybe a bit hung up on types of protein too. I know some people would be like, oh, well, I'm not having my pre-bed protein feed because it's not casein and I don't have any casein protein. Realistically, that matters so little on the grand scheme of things, type of protein. Like it will matter in some small cases and it'll be a tiny little percentage of difference. But that difference between just having the protein is minuscule. So just have the protein. So if it's from protein cereal and you like protein cereal, I'm not going to judge you. I mean, if you're paying 24 quid for a box of cereal, I will judge you, but not because of your protein source, because no one should pay 24 quid for one box of cereal.
It's not one box, 4 boxes.
Still,
so 6 in a box. But even 6 in a box.
Excessive still. But we won't judge you for that.
No, if you got the dough, far away. But don't make it sacrifice that then you eat poorly for the rest of the day and your food shop's really bad because you're spending all your money on protein cereal. Anyway, I think it kind of leads into a little bit there of, well, I mean, we think we've answered some of the things like, you know, what to do if you are a hard gainer. You need to ensure that your training is correct, that your calories are there. And no, it It doesn't need to be a massive, massive surplus. You know, like Luke did, you know, calculate your energy output based off your BMI and your training, and then maybe just stick 200, 250, 300 on top of that to gain a little bit of, you know, to give your body the raw materials to grow, to build, to have, you know, some energy left over to be able to build muscle. But it doesn't need to be 600, 700, 800, 900. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Calories. You've just got to do it consistently.
And I think a really important thing that you said earlier as well with that is having those markers in the sand to look at where you're progressing with as well. So you can add in that kind of 200, 300 calories, and then you can 4 weeks, 6 weeks down the line, just assess, have I seen a difference? If I haven't, sweet, let's take it up a little bit more. And those ways of doing that, then it's so much easier. Whereas if you just say, oh, I'm just going to look to put on mass and I'm going to eat a little bit more for an indefinite amount of time, you're going to be much more likely to not eat a little bit more. That indefinite amount of time will be a lot less than a definite amount of time.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. Do you know what? That's me. I need to put a line in the sand. I'm going to do it. It allows you, I say, an endpoint. I was saying this to a client. If you have that, if something then comes up, you're more likely to stay on plan or stick to it because you're like, oh, I've only got 2 weeks left. I've only got 3 weeks until my review, and then I can change things. Whereas if it's an indefinite period of time, you're like, it's only this once. And that once then turns into 2, 3, 4, 5 times. So yeah, definitely. But leading into what we were talking about there, protein cereal, is tips of getting more intake in. Because one of the common things that I think, or if there's any hard gainers listening to this, which I'm hoping there are, one of the things that they get told is just eat more. And as you said, getting in 3,000 calories up to 3,500 calories is challenging to do. So, mate, hit us with a couple of the tips that you've got that we can increase
so
intake.
A huge one is increasing meal frequency. If you're not already having kind of like 3 meals and 3 snacks per day, then there's room around that to add in different times of feeds and get that feeding in. And like I said about those pre-workout meals, make them a little bit bigger. And then obviously it's all well and good saying that. What I like to do in terms of looking at kind of the type of food and how to do that is almost like reverse engineering it, where we know that there are a few factors that will make us feel more full. And we look at those and we think backwards. So we know that if we have to chew the food a lot more, if it's tough and chewy, we're going to feel more full. So drink your food is a really nice, easy one there. Adding in shakes and throwing some stuff in there that you can drink, take it on, especially when we talked about carbs earlier as well. Drinking your carbs, taking those on is so fine. Getting a good quality like malto powder or something like that, really easy way to just get more in, or blitzing up a ton of oats in smoothies, that kind of stuff. Oats, probably not actually a good one, because another thing that makes us full is fiber. Yeah. So working back from that and having less fiber, that kind of thing. We know that if food tastes bland, we're going to fill up quicker as well. So having food that you enjoy, especially if you're looking to put on mass, don't just be choking down the classic bro meal of broccoli, chicken, rice.
And broccoli and rice.
You're going to suffer. Your gut's going to suffer with the amount of fiber in there too. So I like to kind of reverse engineer stuff like that and think, okay, what is going to fill me up? Let's do the opposite.
100%, mate. I think you nailed it there. Like, mass gainer shakes exist for a reason. You know, we're not saying that you need to do that, but being sensible with liquid nutrition is definitely something that you can add in. I like to say, add it as a pre-workout, add it as an in-between your meals option. So you don't always have to then have something solid as a snack. You can sip on we used to do it with some of our athletes to get the amount of calories in that was required. We used to call it a super smoothie, and just 900 calories of a smoothie, and it would just be sipped over the day. You know, in between meals, after meals, there's like a bit of a sweet kind of, finish. And all of a sudden then you're jacking on 100 calories to a meal, 250 calories, 300 calories in between it. So using liquid nutrition, I say, even blended down, like you said, is going to be beneficial. And just on the top of that, when you said making food more easier to consume, liquid nutrition, definitely the first point. But even the types of food. So you said there, the bro meal, chicken, rice and broccoli. We like to be like, well, how easy is it to eat mince? How easy is it to overeat spaghetti bolognese or chili con carne or a burrito, for example? If it's already kind of broken down and processed a little bit in terms of like mince or like slow cooked meats where it's like, shredded, then it's much easier to consume in larger amounts. So yeah, for me, the type of food there, and then even the way that you cook your carbs. So like mashed potato is much easier than eating whole potatoes. So, like little things like this can definitely help. We have a whole article on this on the PH blog, which will be on the show notes, just linked to it. It's definitely an easy thing to kind of do. And then energy density of foods. For me, berries are great. They're really good. I love berries. But when you're trying to gain weight and you're trying to hit 3,500 calories, potentially bananas, potentially dried apricots and dates are probably going to be a little bit better, as well as a few berries if you wanted to add them in. But, the energy density of food. So again, higher fat cuts of meat. So ribeyes, slow cooked meats, chicken thighs as opposed to chicken breast, salmon instead of cod. Like these types of things you can easily do and just have the same meals that you normally do. It's just they're going to provide you with more calories. And now these aren't junk calories that you're just kind of adding in. These are from nutrient dense whole food sources. However, if you do this consistently, it doesn't mean that you've just got to keep eating all the time. Your same problem, even the same portion size, the same amount of meals. But like Luke said, if they're more frequent and they're more energy dense, hopefully then that's going to lead you to getting the correct calorie intake.
Yeah, amazing. So yeah, I think we've covered pretty much everything there. We will touch on one more thing, Liam. I know I don't want to keep you too long, but you mentioned it before and you said we'd come back to it. Creatine. Talk to me about creatine.
Yeah. I think supplementation is definitely for muscle building. I definitely think that there's some stuff there that's going to really help. Creatine is something I think is an easy win for people. I think it's so many benefits for so many different things in terms of muscle building, in terms of it's an energy source, it's a cellular hydrator, it helps with power, helps with muscle gain. So for me, it's an easy win. I mean, it's not so cheap these days.
Yeah,
it's cheaper than most things. So the price has gone up, but you can still shop around and get some good deals and stuff like that. So, even if you are going to potentially buy like a mass gainer or something that has like protein and carbs, then it might have creatine in it. For me, creatine is definitely something that is a non-negotiable if you're really struggling to gain muscle. Other supplementation wise, I think you just got to be looking at treating any deficiencies. For me, that would be the bottom line. So get some blood work done, look at zinc, look at magnesium, look at omega-3 balance, look at vitamin D, address any deficiencies and bring them up. They're probably going to help you rather than chucking in, I don't know, some root that someone's found in the Amazon jungle that supposedly makes you jacked and costs you £50 a month. Stay clear of that. And
omegas, I think there is worth kind of hanging on a little bit more as well, because there was some research a while back that hinted at the possibility of omega-3s amplifying the adaptations that you get from resistance training as well. I don't know how much more has been built on that, but I know there was some research out there. And it's one of those where omega-3s are so beneficial for so many other things as well that, hey, if it has that effect as well, happy days. So I think that's a huge one, definitely.
Mate, definitely. And the amount of blood work that I've done, there's very, 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 very few people that have an optimal omega-3 to 6 ratio. So like Luke said, it's definitely something that with the volume of training that you're going to do and the stress that you're putting on your body, like you say, that research is very promising, but there's so many other benefits. So definitely something.
Awesome. Ace, Liam, thank you very much. I think we'll call it there. I think we've touched on pretty much
awesome. I think it's motivated me to put a line in the sand.
If you are a hard gainer listening to this, if you identify as a hard gainer listening to this and you think we haven't necessarily touched on something, then let us know, because obviously we'll answer that and we'll get back to you. Hopefully, though, you're going to be flying and you're going to stop labeling yourself as a hard gainer and just as a gainer, because you're going to be gaining weight, right? But Liam, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on, man. It's
pleasure,
been great. And I'll see you soon. And everyone else, see you soon too.